the captain spot. I'm your host, Justin Freeman. 6 foot 1 inches, 274 pounds of fantasy knowledge. And every time, guys, I say this is a special slate, but we actually do have a special Tuesday night football slate here upon us. The Showdown gods are smiling on us. We must please them and make them happy by constructing beautiful, beautiful lineups for them tonight, where we're talking Titans and Bills. The game is in Nashville. Titans are plagued by COVID-19. We didn't think this game was going to happen, but alas, here we are on a Tuesday Showdown Spotlight edition of this game. It should be a really, really fun one. There's a lot of angles for us to dissect, but before we hop in the slate, reminder, this show is available in so many places, guys. Mayo Media Network, subscribe there. Captain Spot YouTube channel, subscribe there. Captain Spot podcast feed on your favorite podcasting app, subscribe there, and you can find my write-ups each and every slate over at numberball.com. Get a nice little promo code over there when you go to captainspot.com. Hook you up with a free copy of the ebook if you use my promo code there. So would really, really appreciate that, guys. But without much further ado, why don't we hop into the slate where we've got a really interesting matchup. We've got Josh Allen playing godlike football, looking fantastic. Just maybe top 2 quarterback in the league at the moment, maybe top 3 with Aaron Rodgers, Russ Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, sort of in that mix, top 4 maybe. Looking really, really, really good. Well, yeah, I hedged that just one by one as I started thinking about other really, really good quarterbacks. But yeah, Josh Allen looking really good. Derrick Henry already had a couple 100-yard games. Obviously, the Titans didn't play last week, but Derrick Henry already has 200-yard games under his belt. Had a massive game in week 3 where he went for 119 and 2 touchdowns. It's pretty solid usage there for Derrick Henry. So we're going to have to figure out exactly how to round out our roster with a bunch of guys who are impacted by this COVID-19 news over on the Tennessee side of the football. And there's a number of injuries and COVID-related situations for us to go over here. First of all, just sort of the textbook injuries. A.J. Brown listed as questionable this game, star wide receiver for the Titans. It seems like he is trending towards going. It was really unconventional injury reporting for this particular game, given the way it was sort of postponed, pushed back, delayed, and all that. So A.J. Brown currently looks like he's good to go. John Brown on the other side of the football for Buffalo, he's questionable as well. I do expect he plays, but I don't have as good a hunch on that as I do on A.J. Brown. Zach Moss, backup running back behind Devin Singletary, is questionable as well. Will he suit up in this game? We don't really know. And if that does happen, what does that look like? We'll go over all of that here. And then Andre Roberts listed as questionable, just sort of an end of the roster type of guy at this point in his career, Andre Roberts for the Bills. The COVID situation on the Tennessee side of the football, much, much more impactful here. I guess we can't really consider these guys out. There's still a window by which they can return into this game. They could still be activated based on a couple negative tests in a row and being asymptomatic and that whole deal. I don't know the specifics of all that, just know that there is a window for Corey Davis, wide receiver. And when I say there's a window, I think it's a pretty thin window. The odds of them playing aren't very large. We just want to make sure nothing sneaks up on us here on the Inactives Report 90 minutes before lock. So keeping an eye on Corey Davis, who we expect to be out for COVID, wide receiver for Tennessee. Wide receiver Adam Humphries, wide receiver Cameron Batson, tight end Michael Pruitt, and fullback / running back type hybrid guy Kerry Blasingame. So want to make sure we are sort of putting those guys out of our mind. No Corey Davis, no Adam Humphries. That's going to funnel a lot of targets in this offense. Obviously getting A.J. Brown back, that's certainly another assumption based on the health of this particular team. We don't know that for sure, but assuming we get A.J. Brown back, he should inherit a pretty monstrous workload. It's going to be one of our favorite targets in this game because, targets to A.J. Brown have just been historically efficient. He's got a great catch rate and an even better average depth of target. So he's just a phenomenal play with tremendous amount of upside. Certainly somebody we want to be considering in our captain assignments and really throughout the roster. I mean, he's going to have a reasonably high floor based on the number of options that are missing around him. Like Adam Humphries is a target vacuum. He just sort of keeps bringing them in. Corey Davis has been highly utilized, and so not having either of those guys or Cameron Batson or Michael Pruitt just really sort of empties up that passing game and makes A.J. Brown a lot more stable than he would be in any other week. There are some potential practice squad call-up guys on the Tennessee side of the football. Cody Hollister, wide receiver, Chester Rogers, wide receiver, and Deontay Foreman, running back. I would say in that order is their likelihood of being called up. I would feel pretty certain that we'll see Cody Hollister in this game. Chester Rogers also a strong maybe, so make sure that we're digging deep and understanding. And I know not all those guys are available on each platform. FanDuel actually has probably a deeper player pool than DraftKings. They tend to use the practice squads as part of their available player pool, while DraftKings does not. Also, Jeff Swaim has been an inactive tight end for Tennessee, but with Michael Pruitt being out, I expect Swaim to be active for the first time this year. So lots and lots of news for us to adjust to, but I think that'll more or less cover it. We'll kind of go into the pricing and make sure we have a good understanding of what we're looking at here, where we're talking about quarterback Josh Allen, $13,000, Ryan Tannehill, $9,800. Josh Allen is a phenomenal play. The only problem is his salary. However, I've just given you some pretty good reasoning as to why we can probably still afford to jam $13,000 Josh Allen into our lineup. Just a phenomenal floor-ceiling combo from Josh Allen. He's just kind of a smash play. And we have lots of really cheap options to bail us out there now that so many targets are available over on the Tennessee side of the football. It's going to be really hard for me to imagine that with that many cheap available targets that Josh Allen wouldn't be in the winning lineup. I think he just makes a lot of sense there at $13,000. And don't sleep on Ryan Tannehill, $9,800. This is not a terrible matchup against the Buffalo defense. They don't overwhelmingly limit their opponents in the passing game. They have a lockdown corner in Tre'Davious White, who's also questionable this week. So there is a possibility that Ryan Tannehill gets cooking with some efficient targets going to his star receiver, A.J. Brown. At the running back position, Devin Singletary will be the most expensive player on the Buffalo side of the ball. Too big of a price gap, though, between Devin Singletary and Zach Moss if Zach Moss plays. Now, if Zach Moss is inactive in this game, it's going to be some additional carries headed to TJ Yeldon, but Devin Singletary more or less is going to be a feature back at this point. Like we saw that last week, Devin Singletary hardly left the field. Just phenomenal usage. That's exactly what we're looking for in our running backs. He's involved in the pass game. He's involved certainly in the running game, and gives us a tremendous floor-ceiling combo. 75% of the team's rush attempts last week for Devin Singletary. Just seeded a handful to Josh Allen, 2 to Isaiah McKenzie, and 1 to Andre Roberts. So we got every single running back rush in that offense. Really good usage. Played 89% of the team snaps. Matter of fact, has done that in back-to-back weeks without Zach Moss. And TJ Yeldon just playing 10% and 13% of the snaps in those 2 weeks. So I expect usage like that to continue. So Devin Singletary, a guy who, our desire to play him this week is going to hinge heavily on Zach Moss, because if Zach Moss is active, I don't foresee that being like a true timeshare, but certainly one that's not quite in proportion with those two salaries. On the Tennessee side of the football, it's all Derrick Henry. Darrington Evans only cost you $1,000 compared to Derrick Henry's $11,000, but we're just speculating any potential carries headed to Darrington Evans because they haven't been there so far. He's just not been a focal point of this offense. Played 11% of the team snaps in week 3. Obviously, they were off last week. It's just been a monstrous workload for Derrick Henry, who's running about 75% of the team snaps and getting almost all of their running back workload. Has ceded a carry to Jeremy McNichols and Sonoris Perry in week 2, but other than that, it's just been monster workload for our guy Derrick Henry. So I don't think Darrington Evans, unless you're just playing the Derrick Henry injury card, I don't think Darrington Evans is paying off $1,000, and I don't see Jeremy McNichols paying off $200 either. Not in the context of this game. I suppose the story you could tell yourself on Jeremy McNichols, who's more likely to come down if the game got out of hand in Buffalo's favor, could catch some PPR points, but I think honestly we're going to need a bit more upside from our cheap guys this week. Looking at the pass catchers for both these teams, Steph Diggs at 10-6, that's he's really established himself as the true wide receiver 1 in this offense, but at 10-6, that's a pretty big price point for a wide receiver in a Josh Allen-led offense. Now, the production has been there for Stephon Diggs. You just have to wonder whether it's sustainable and something that we can bank on in the course of a single game. At 10-6, I think you have reasons to fade him. But if John Brown is out this game, John Brown cost you $5,800 this game, you probably play Diggs with a bit more confidence, but it's also going to open up some targets further down the line to guys like Gabriel Davis at 4,600 and Cole Beasley at 6,800. Cole Beasley just sort of steady Eddie. We know we're getting there. I think he has more touchdown upside than people realize, but at 6,800, just a really good way to sort of round out your roster there. But it's going to be some of these cheap guys over on the Tennessee side that we're able to take advantage of. But to sort of fill out the rest of the Buffalo roster, Dawson Knox, 3,400. I had actually hoped Dawson Knox would be a pretty useful piece of this offense and just really hadn't been so far. Has missed some time due to injury, came back last week, just sort of a non-factor, drew 9% of the team's targets. He hasn't topped 9% in a single game this year. He's not on the field a ton. So overall, they just seem to not be running a lot of multi-tight end sets this year, which is a little bit of trade-off. They're trying to get Stephon Diggs, John Brown, and then some combination of Gabriel Davis and Cole Beasley on the field at the same time. I should say that Gabriel Davis appears to be outplaying Cole Beasley. 59% of the team snaps last week for Gabriel Davis compared to 30% for Cole Beasley. Major red flag. The week before that, 74% compared to 61%. So week 3 was the first week that Gabriel Davis started playing more than Cole Beasley. And we look at the targets, Beasley still has the edge. 22%, if we look back at week 3, 22% to Cole Beasley, 13% to Gabriel Davis. In week 4, 13% to Beasley, 3% to Gabriel Davis. So, Beasley has a really high target count, and maybe that's what matters. Maybe he is just out there when it matters. And I think there's reasonable minds may differ as to who's the preferred option in that offense between Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis. I tend to value snaps quite a bit, but I value targets even more. I think if I look back at what's gotten us in trouble, say even last night's game between the Saints and the Chargers, we're trying to break down that Emmanuel Sanders versus Traquan Smith not backfield, but wide receiver core. If you followed the snaps, you would have been on Traquan Smith. If you followed the targets, you would have been on Emmanuel Sanders, and we saw how that happened. Emmanuel Sanders worked out in a big way. So. People may be interested in playing Gabriel Davis over Cole Beasley, but the targets seem to be there for Beasley. But I'd encourage you to sort of sprinkle your usage out across those guys. The last guy I mentioned there for Buffalo, Isaiah McKenzie, will cost you $800. You can fire him up if you want to. It shouldn't be with a whole ton of confidence, but he's out there for about a third of the team's snaps and is getting, 2 or 3 targets a game basically at this point. So you have to ask yourself, can he pay off his salary with that type of usage? Probably not the best idea. We probably want to focus on this Tennessee side where we're talking about A.J. Brown, $8,800. That's underpriced given what we think his role is in this offense, given the COVID situation. We can just project him for at least 25% of the team's targets at this point, I believe. Jonnu Smith, $7,200. Another guy who obviously gets a workload boost given the COVID situation for the Tennessee side, but $7,200. I think it's just going to be a matter of whether you think Jonnu Smith can score a touchdown or not. He's certainly going to be a pretty strong red zone weapon. He can sort of operate the middle of the field while A.J. Brown stretches it on the outside. But another guy who is probably more capable or as capable as A.J. Brown on stretching the field is Khalif Raymond, $4,800. Raymond just has not gotten a ton of snaps. I don't think the team wants him to. He's just sort of that lid-lifting type of guy that can be used situationally. He's only $4,800. Now you're telling me he's going to get a full-time role. I'm really interested. Khalif Raymond is a superstar productive player when he's targeted. Just fantastic in terms of production. So at $4,800, yeah, I'm interested in Khalif Raymond for sure. Probably possesses more ceiling than Cole Beasley or Gabriel Davis on the other side, just given the sheer number of targets that we can project him for, given the COVID situation. Anthony Ferguson at $200 is just clearly mispriced. Even without the COVID thing, Anthony Ferguson should be like a $2,000 player, but he's $200. And, now we can project him not only for a red zone touchdown, we can probably project him for, maybe 4 targets or something like that in this game. And if Ferguson can go, 3 or 4 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, now all of a sudden you got to have him, and you can probably even consider captaining a guy with that if it helps you get to everybody else. That may be taking a step too far. Let me pump the brakes on that. Nick Westbrook is $200. He is an undrafted free agent who is, just recently got called up, and so he'll cost you $200. We haven't seen a ton of Nick Westbrook so far, so it's tough to know exactly what to expect, but there's just a gaping hole now without Corey Davis and Adam Humphries on the roster there for Tennessee. Somebody has to catch these footballs from Jimmy Garoppolo. Westbrook played 10% of the snaps in week 2, 16% of the snaps in week 3. Played ahead of Cody Hollister. Cody Hollister inactive week 2 and week 3. And, I imagine we'll see Hollister suit up again, but, Nick Westbrook could be the number 3 in this offense without Cameron. We got to remember Cameron Batson not playing as well. I've been focused on Humphries and Corey Davis, but not having a guy like Cameron Batson, who was on the field for 55 and 60% of the team snaps, opens things up for Nick Westbrook. So $200, phenomenal price for Nick Westbrook. Jeff Swaim is a guy we expect to be active. He'll cost you $200, and Cody Hollister $200 as well. All those guys are playable. I'd probably steer away from Swaim, but Nick Westbrook, Cody Hollister, certainly a couple guys that we can be using. So that's pretty much going to cut it for our situation here, where we're talking about breaking down this game position by position. Let's take a look at our captain usage, where it's Derrick Henry, who is our favorite captain of the week. It's just a predictably monstrous workload for Derrick Henry. The only hope is that he doesn't get game scripted out of here. But this is actually a pretty competitive captain group here. Nobody topping 20%. Stephon Diggs, despite his price tag, obviously when he pays off, it's going to work out in a big way for Stephon Diggs. Just really efficient. We've got a lot of really efficient receivers in this game. Ryan Tannehill and Josh Allen. After that, you'll see Josh Allen a tad bit less preferred than Ryan Tannehill, and a lot of that's got to do with price. And then A.J. Brown under that. So it was a little bit surprising to see Diggs ahead of A.J. Brown, given the projected target load. And then after that, pretty big drop-off for the rest of those guys. Let's take a look at our flex appearances, where Josh Allen is our safest guy. We want to try to make sure we get him in as many lineups as possible, as well as Ryan Tannehill. I would have a hard time imagining, given the salary situation of this slate, both quarterbacks not being in the winning lineup. I think you're going to have both of those. Derrick Henry looks like a really safe bet as well. But it's Anthony Ferguson, sort of our first really cheap guy, who looks like really strong in our flex appearances here. You're going to want to try to get Anthony Ferguson's $200 in there, and it helps you just get so many of the other pieces. But I think that's going to be a relatively popular thing for people to get to, so just make sure we're leaving a little bit of salary back on the table. So that's everything for this particular slate. We got a handful of listener questions. I haven't done one of these yet so far, so I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to chime in and ask whatever questions they might have. I think we've got 7 of these today. We'll get into each and every one of them. First one is from Zeke Scott. 5'10", 160 pounds, Zeke Scott. Do you use the optimizer for Showdown lineups? And Zeke, I wish I could say I did. They are loaded with, my projections and number ball. And so it would have everything that I need in order to be able to run like 150 max, MME build, but I don't do it that way. I have sort of a special in-house program that I've built with the help of a lot of really smart people that sort of runs these simulations. The things that I share with you on this screen, I have an R program where I can type in exactly what I want it to spit out, and I'll type in 10,000 simulations, and what I do is I hook it into my projection spreadsheet. This is all really nerdy, and I know most people probably don't care, but it's really fascinating to me. It hooks into my projections and makes assumptions about what sort of the baseline is for each player. And then it goes play by play through the game and simulates, things that are most likely to happen. So I do it that way. And then at the end, what it populates for me is a list of the optimal lineup in each simulation. And that's what I share with you. So I'm playing right off this stuff that I'm sharing with you guys. The only difference is, I get to produce this show one time. I'm probably rerunning these numbers half a dozen times as like each little small iteration is made and announcements are made. Like if all of a sudden we find Cody Hollister is or isn't playing, I'm going to go in, tweak his projection, and rerun the whole thing. It takes about an hour for the whole thing to process. So no, I don't use the optimizer personally because I have this sort of rather unique process. I imagine not many people are doing anything quite like that. Adam Woodruff, 5'8", 170. Always the bridesmaid, he says. Do you approach single entry GPP different than MME? And yeah, I think you have to. MME, you can cover so many of your bases, and I'd say and that's one of the things that's valuable to me, and one of the reasons I approach the game the way I do in Showdown is that you can cover quite a few bases in Showdown. I know some people think if they had 150 lineups, they'd win every time, but I can assure you this is a lot more difficult than that. But yeah, I think you have to understand that in MME, you can sort of treat things as, sort of a portfolio, and you're expecting a certain return when certain things happen that you're overweight or underweight on the field. And you're also got to be really careful about, combinations, how you're creating roster combinations with that MME build. So I think if you are using an optimizer, make sure that those correlations are in there the way you want. But single entry GPP, not something I have a ton of experience with, if I'm being completely honest, because, I think you can make a really good single entry GPP lineup over a 13 game slate where there's a lot of decisions to prove that you are smarter than the rest of the field. And over that course of an entire slate, there's a really good chance that you are correct in proving, whether you are sharper or duller than the field. I don't know that that's necessarily the case in Showdown with a single lineup. And so that's why I feel more comfortable building 150 maxes, because I just can't throw a single GPP lineup out there for Showdown and say, yeah, I think this is the one. But I think if that was going to be a focus, I would want to make sure that we are, focusing on trying to be unique for one. You definitely don't want to be duplicated with anybody, but you don't want to be so far out there that you're on too thin of a limb. Like you want to try to give yourself a very direct path to winning. Think of it like a parlay. What type of odds would you need, for this parlay to pay off, based on your 5 or 6 person lineup. And then ask yourself, do I get that same parlay or better over the course of building this particular GPP lineup? So, I think a lot of times it's going to be fading 1 or 2 highly owned players, making sure you're doing that, and probably picking up 1 very low owned player, and or just leaving salary on the table. But that's not going to be a really fun thing to do in single entry. But I think you're going to really tilt quite a bit playing single entry GPPs on Showdown because every play just swings things so much. I don't know that you'll realize, a realistic expectation anytime soon. Chase Simmons, 5'10", 195. What's the differences between FanDuel and DraftKings that you've noticed? On FanDuel, it seems like the lack of a price difference when plugging in MVP makes it suboptimal to avoid the quarterback. Differences between Showdown, NFL, MLB, NBA. How does correlation vary depending on the sport? I wish I was more qualified to talk on the NBA and MLB, but frankly, I'm just not experienced in either of those sports. But I can talk to you about the difference between DraftKings and FanDuel because I have been switching back and forth between the two depending on where I feel like there's an edge based on the pricing and things like that and the sharpness of the field. And I can tell you I've had more success over on FanDuel. I've now got 5 first places under my belt, one of which was for a really large prize. Most of the others were under $4,000, but still enough to get me through the rest of the season playing Showdown, which is great. So overall, I've enjoyed that. But you mentioned the differences between the sites, and I think a big difference on the FanDuel side is the min price $5,000. It just eliminates so many players out of the player pool that you can't even consider as viable options anymore. And occasionally one of those guys that you thought you could write off will pop into the winning lineup, but just not enough to consider playing those guys routinely. So, whereas we're interested in $200 Nick Westbrook here on the DraftKings slate, we wouldn't be interested in $5,000 Nick Westbrook over on FanDuel. Like he's just, we can't do it. And certainly the same would be for Jeff Swaim or Jeremy McNichols or whoever, like guys that you could see popping into the winning lineup on DraftKings won't be there in FanDuel. So first, you've got a smaller player pool on FanDuel to work from. But on top of that, the lack of MVP additional pricing over on FanDuel, like you can't say it's a true lock it quarterback, but if you just lock buttoned, each quarterback, maybe did 50% of each quarterback in this game or in either game, you'd probably pay off quite a bit more because the field still isn't doing that enough based on what we know. And we don't have enough data on the FanDuel side because they don't have CSV downloads. There's an inability to go back and see what other people in the field are playing unless you're a FanDuel employee and have that data. There's a great article by Brandon Gadula over on NumberFire. Has a lot of FanDuel specifics since he's able to peek behind the curtain there. From @StrictBiz187, he's 5'11", 185. Do your sims take into account if, say, Michael Thomas came back but wasn't 100%? His normal Madden type rating when running the sim would be 97. Do you run the sims with him at a score like 90 because he's not healthy? Good question. That's not exactly the way the sims run. Like I don't make like attribute scores on players like a Madden does. What I do is I use just their historical tendencies. I go back and I look at the last 16 games of that player, and create essentially a distribution of their yardage and where we expect. If you want me to tell you how far this Michael Thomas reception is going to go for, because the sim says Michael Thomas caught the football, what I'm going to do is go back and look over this last 16 games and see where he tends to catch the football, and I'm going to pick one at random somewhere in that range. But it's also going to take into account the defense he's playing against, his offensive situation, and some NFL league averages to make sure that we're not getting too far out of bounds on any of those players. So there's a lot that goes into it, but not a lot for injury. What I try to do for injuries is decrease the target share. Like if I think Michael Thomas is going to be banged up, it's not that I think he's all of a sudden going to catch a 4-yard pass instead of a 10-yard pass. It's more I think he's just not going to draw the target in that situation. So maybe his target share goes from 30% down to 25% or something like that in that type of situation. Mike Carr, 5'10", 204. When setting lineups, are you looking at 3-3 or 4-2 the majority of your lineups? Good question, Mike. It's not something I put a ton of emphasis on. Like I kind of blindly run these simulations and take what it gives me. But I will go back and check occasionally to see if I'm too far off on one team or the other. I think what I like to do is make sure that my baseline projections look really, really good. And match what I perceive the game script to look like. This Tennessee game is a good example. Like my initial run of projections have Ryan Tannehill throwing for probably too many yards because now all of a sudden instead of getting crappy Adam Humphries targets, I'm getting big Khalif Raymond targets, and he's historically produced really, really well. So I have to go in and change those things because I was getting a lot of heavy Titans lineups. And in this situation, like even though I think the Titans lose the game, I'm still fine with it being like 4-2 Titans if it works out that I'm taking advantage of like extreme pricing, misappropriation over on the Titan side of the ball. So I'm okay with that. Like I think your lineup can tell a story of who wins and loses in reverse sometimes. So just something to keep in mind as long as the pricing's right. Not a big priority for me there. Chris Diggins, 5'10", 230. What are the biggest mistakes experienced players make in Captain Showdown tournament lineups? Yeah, good question. I think most experienced players at this point are leaving salary on the table. It's just like the easiest way to avoid duplicates and increase your overall ROI when you hit. I think sometimes people can get a little overly unique, and others would argue that there's no such thing as being overly unique. It's better to have an awful lineup that no one else has than to have a mediocre lineup that's shared with 12 people. But I think the thing to realize is that each and every lineup has a likelihood of occurring within the context of a single slate. And some lineups are better than others, and some lineups are, in the situation I just gave, 12 times better than others. Like some lineups, I have at least a 12x chance of beating this other lineup over here, and I would rather play that, even though I'm splitting with 12 other people. I hope that makes sense a little bit. Like each lineup, and that's the great thing about simulation, is that I can assign a likelihood of each and every lineup combination of hitting by running it 10,000. And I'd love to be able to run it 1,000,000 times and get even more precise about it. But I can tell you how often does combination A, B, C, D, E, F with A in the captain hit, out of 10,000 times. And then I can tell you based on that how many people I'd be comfortable sharing first place with at that point. And then that tells me whether or not it's a good lineup. So I think thinking probabilistically and that's a big difference between FanDuel and DraftKings. Like, everybody hates FanDuel because you chop on FanDuel. You're going to be more likely to chop. I'd also say it's a much easier game to win, significantly easier because of some of the reasons we've already outlined. Like, you don't deserve to win the $100,000 top prize solo when you hit on FanDuel because you have like a 10x likelihood of it happening to you. So of course you're going to split it with at least 10 people. Like, it just makes sense. I think approaching the game differently in that way is something I see, a concept I think I see differently than other people. Chris Diggins, 5'10", Jack Wheatrey, 6'3", 210. That's our last question. 6'3", 210 pounds of fantasy mediocrity. Oh gosh, Jack, we got to get you up to speed. How do you get unique without your lineup sucking? Thanks. That's the $1 million question, Jack. I wish I had better advice for you. I think people overestimate correlation sometimes. And I've talked about this before, the difference between correlation and rules. Rules are binary, right? Yes, no. If this, then that. But correlation uses the phrase tends to. If this, then tends to that, right? And tends to is not hard and fast. Like, quarterback and receiver tend to score well together. Not always, though. Just because we're playing A.J. Brown doesn't mean we have to play Ryan Tannehill tonight. A.J. Brown could go off and Ryan Tannehill can be left out of the winning lineup. A.J. Brown might have an end-around touchdown for 50 yards. It could be a lot of different things. So I think the thing is, like, get some of the avoid rules and turn them into correlations. And I think you'll open yourself up to more possibilities. So that'll do it for our listener questions. I enjoyed that, guys. Hope you guys did as well. If you do have questions in the future, just hit me up on Twitter. I'm at JustinFreeman18. You can find my work over at Numberball, at NumberBallDFS on Twitter as well. Check out CaptainSpot.com and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast and right here on YouTube. Give me a like, give me the thumbs up, give me the subscription, baby. That's all I need. Just feed me with subscriptions. We'll talk to you guys next week. See ya.